Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Leave your thoughts in the comments. The Billionaire and the Golden Contract. Ethan Vance was a man of power and influence. His business empire spanned across multiple capitals, crossing borders and solidifying his name as one of the most respected in the business world. His fortune was incalculable, his presence imposing, and his strategic mind capable of transforming any opportunity into success. However, all this prestige and wealth didn't fill the void he carried within him. At 42, Ethan was a man marked by a trauma that had molded his view on love and human relationships. In the past, he had believed blindly in the purest feeling, and, in return, received the cruelest of betrayals. He still remembered with clarity the fateful day that destroyed his trust forever. It was a rainy night when he decided to come home early to surprise his wife. He had a luxurious gift in his hands, something she had wanted for a long time. But what he found when he opened the door was a scene he could never have imagined. The muffled whispers, the clothes scattered on the floor, the smell of perfume mixed with betrayal. His wife, the woman he loved and swore was his partner for life, was in the arms of another man, completely surrendered, without guilt, without hesitation. For an instant, the world stopped. The blood drained from his face, his chest tightened, and his breathing became heavy. The shock was overwhelming. He blinked a few times, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare, but this was real. The disbelief soon gave way to anger, and from anger to absolute coldness. He didn't scream. He didn't out-argue. He just watched them for a long moment, as if he were engraving that scene in his mind to never forget. And then, without saying a single word, he turned his back and left. On that night, Ethan Vance didn't just lose his wife. He lost his belief in love. He lost the ability to trust. Since then, he became a cold, closed, inaccessible man. In his view, all women were gold diggers, ready to destroy a man in the name of ambition. And that was how he learned to live, surrounded by luxury, but alone, rationalizing every decision, building insurmountable walls around his heart. He believed he would never allow himself to feel again. But fate, relentless as always, had other plans for him. What do you think of Ethan's reaction? Was he right to leave without saying a word, or should he have confronted his wife? Leave your opinion in the comments. The heir and the decision. The years passed, and Ethan remained faithful to his decision to never trust anyone again. Love had become a flawed concept for him, a dangerous illusion that only led to pain and disappointment. His refuge was in work, in strategic decisions, in mergers and acquisitions that further strengthened his empire. He woke up early, spent hours on end in meetings, and when the day ended, he returned to his empty mansion, where silence was his only companion. However, no matter how accustomed he was to this solitary routine, a restlessness began to take over his thoughts. Something tormented him on sleepless nights, a subtle discomfort that, over time, became an impossible weight to ignore. He had built an empire, erected businesses that crossed borders, but for whom? For what? He had no heir. The idea that everything he had conquered with effort and sacrifice could simply dissolve after his death disturbed him. His last name, his history, his entire legacy would disappear without a successor. Ethan had always been proud to be a rational man, but this concern went beyond logic. It was a fear that touched something deep inside him, a need to leave his mark on the world, to ensure that everything he fought for was not in vain. The companies would continue without him. The shareholders would find another name to take his place. But his blood, his lineage, that would be erased over time. There was no one to carry his name forward. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself facing a dilemma that could not be solved with money or power. He needed an heir, and for that, he would have to make a decision that would change his life forever. The night fell over the city, illuminating the glass buildings with golden reflections of the urban lights. The sophisticated restaurant, located in the heart of the financial center, was filled with executives and influential figures, all involved in discreet conversations and elegant toasts. The refined aroma of exclusive dishes hung in the air, mixing with the subtle perfume of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Ethan arrived promptly, as was his custom. His imposing posture and serious gaze made the waiters recognize him immediately, leading him to a reserved table in a more discreet corner of the room. A few minutes later, Ricardo, his longtime friend, joined him, greeting him with a firm handshake. "Finally made time in your schedule to see me," Ricardo joked, calling the waiter with a discreet wave. "Don't exaggerate," Ethan replied, sketching a half smile. It was a busy day, endless meetings, and more contracts to close. Ricardo laughed, ordering a double whiskey. "Ah, the burden of being a magnate." Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. "Don't even get me started. But today isn't about business." Ricardo raised an eyebrow. "Oh no? So what's keeping the all-powerful Ethan Vance up at night?" The waiter served the drinks, and Ethan took a sip before finally answering. "I don't trust anyone, Ricardo." His voice sounded graver than usual. "I spent years building my empire. I learned to deal with betrayals and dirty tricks. But when it comes to people, especially women, it's different. I can't believe in good intentions anymore." Ricardo leaned back in his chair, listening carefully. "Is this still because of your ex?" Ethan clenched his jaw and looked away for an instant. "It's more than that. It's the fear of being deceived again, of getting involved and ending up in the same trap." Ricardo spun the glass between his fingers. "Okay, but why is this topic back now?" Ethan took a deep breath before letting out the truth that tormented him. "I need an heir." The statement hung between the two for a few seconds. Ricardo didn't show surprise. He just slowly felt it. "Makes sense. You have an empire to leave to someone. But what's the problem?" Ethan let out a dry laugh. "The problem is that I'm not going to get married. I don't trust any woman enough for that." Ricardo smiled, resting his elbows on the table. "Then don't get married. Hire a surrogate." The suggestion made Ethan frown. "A surrogate?" "Yes." Ricardo gestured with his hand, as if the answer was obvious. "It's the perfect solution. You'll have your heir without having to get emotionally involved with anyone. Just a straightforward contract." Ethan was silent for a moment, leaning back in his chair. The logic was undeniable, exactly the way he liked it. But still, something inside him hesitated. It seems like a drastic step. "Too much," he murmured more to himself than to Ricardo. "Drastic?" Ricardo laughed, taking another sip of his whiskey. "Drastic would be falling in love and losing half your assets to a gold digger." "This," he said, gesturing to the contract. "This is strategy, Ethan." The magnate didn't respond immediately. His fingers slid over the glass, feeling the cold surface as his mind worked. The idea made sense. More than that, it solved his problem cleanly and rationally. The dinner continued with light conversation, but Ethan barely paid attention. His mind was elsewhere, weighing pros and cons. As he left the restaurant, he walked to his luxury car and stood for a moment, looking at the city skyline. That night would change everything. He needed to make a decision. And this time, he couldn't make a mistake. What's your take on Ricardo's suggestion? Is hiring a surrogate a good solution for Ethan's problem, or is it a step too far? Tell me what you think in the comments. The golden contract. Ethan left nothing to chance. His life was governed by absolute control, and this situation would be no different. He gathered his team of lawyers in his company's meeting room, a spacious, modern room with glass walls that revealed a panoramic view of the city. The silence inside was absolute, only interrupted by the sound of folders being opened and pens into woods lighting across paper. "I want this process to be conducted with complete discretion," Ethan said, his voice firm and imposing. "We cannot take any risks." The lawyers, all experienced and accustomed to dealing with multi-million-dollar contracts, exchanged quick glances before one of them, Dr. Moretti, spoke up. "We understand your demand, Mr. Vance. We have already started the screening. We are analyzing profiles that fit the established criteria." Ethan crossed his arms, staring fixedly at the lawyer. "Remind me of the criteria." Moretti consulted a document and began to list them. The candidate must be discreet, with no history of public exposure. Preferably, without family ties that could complicate the situation in the future. Furthermore, she must be fully aware that, after the birth, she will hand over the child without question. Ethan nodded slowly. "And what about their motivations?" This time, the one who answered was the lawyer Camila, who coordinated the psychological analysis of the candidates. "We are filtering women who genuinely need the money and who understand the proposal. Many of the candidates are single mothers or women in delicate financial situations. For them, this contract represents a chance for a new beginning." Ethan was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. He didn't just want someone desperate for money. He needed a woman who would face it with maturity, who wouldn't create emotional ties with the child. "I want the complete reports for each one, medical, psychological history, and any detail that could pose a risk in the future." "Of course, sir," Moretti confirmed, taking notes. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, watching the horizon. "When will I have a final list?" "In a few days," Camila replied. "We are refining the selection to present you with only the safest options." He took a deep breath. This was just the beginning, but every detail had to be perfect. His empire could not be without an heir, and he could not make mistakes. After weeks of rigorous interviews and selections, Ethan finally found a candidate who caught his attention. Carolina. She was not like the other women who had applied. She didn't show desperation or ambition, just a calm resignation, like someone who had already learned not to expect too much from life. At 27, Carolina carried in her eyes the mark of silent battles and invisible scars. Her face mixed fragility and strength, an intriguing combination for Ethan. He analyzed the dossier on her at his dark mahogany desk. Carolina lived in a small rented apartment in a humble area of the city. Her mother, Mrs. Lords, was a carrier of a chronic disease that required expensive and continuous treatments. Without resources to pay for everything, Carolina accumulated debts while working as a waitress in a diner, facing long hours and rude customers who rarely looked at her beyond the counter. Ethan closed the folder and looked at his lawyer, Dr. Moretti, who was standing beside him. "Has she already been informed about all the terms of the contract?" "Yes, sir." Moretti adjusted his glasses on his face. "But so far, she hasn't given a definitive answer. She asked for some time to think." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Time to think?" he repeated, as if the idea were absurd. "For some people, accepting a deal like this isn't such a simple decision," the lawyer pondered. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, drumming his fingers on the table. He was used to solving everything quickly. But this time, the situation was out of his control. On the other side of the city, in a small apartment with peeling walls, Carolina watched her mother sleep. Mrs. Lords breathed with difficulty. The medicines made her drowsy and weak. Carolina held her mother's hand gently, feeling the weight of that decision on her shoulders. Ethan's proposal would solve all her financial problems. It would give her mother the necessary treatment and perhaps the chance for a dignified life. But what about later? Would she be able to move on, knowing she carried a child she would never know? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her best friend, Camila. "So," Camila sat on the sofa next to her, crossing her arms. "Are you going to accept?" Carolina sighed. "I don't know. It feels wrong, but at the same time it's the only way out." Camila held her hands. "Friend, you have always put your mother first. If this is the only way to help her, maybe it's not wrong. It's a sacrifice, yes, but you have to think about the future." Carolina's eyes welled up. "I'm just scared. Scared of getting attached, scared of regretting it." Camila smiled tenderly. "You have always been strong, and you'll get through this too." Carolina took a deep breath, wiping away the tears. She had already faced too many difficulties to let herself be paralyzed by fear. She looked at her mother once more, and deep down she knew the decision had already been made. The next day, she picked up the phone and dialed the number she had received from the lawyer's office. When Ethan answered, his voice was cold and professional, but direct. "So, Carolina, what is your decision?" She closed her eyes for an instant, gathering courage, and answered, "I accept. That choice would change her life forever." What do you think of Carolina's decision to accept the contract? Would you have done the same in her situation? Or would you have looked for another solution? Share your opinion in the comments. The unexpected heartbeat, the meeting between Ethan and Carolina for the contract signing, happened in an elegant office with glass walls that revealed a panoramic view of the city. He watched her closely, analyzing every gesture, every word. Carolina, in turn, was nervous but determined. She would receive a millionaire sum in exchange for the gestation, without any rights to the child after the birth. The contract signing was silent. Carolina read each clause carefully, her heart beating fast. When she picked up the pen and signed her name on the paper, she felt a mix of relief and fear. Her life was about to change drastically, and so, the gestation process began. What was supposed to be a coldly calculated business deal was about to become something much more complex and unexpected. The months passed, and Carolina's pregnancy advanced without complications. Her body changed every week, and the feeling of carrying a new life inside her was, at the same time, fascinating and frightening. In the beginning, she tried to keep herself emotionally distant. She repeated to herself that it was all just a contract, an agreement that would guarantee her mother's future and pay off all the debts that suffocated her. But as the days turned into months, the reality became more difficult to ignore. The first time she felt the baby move, she was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling on another one of her sleepless nights. A gentle, almost imperceptible movement made her hold her breath. Instinctively, she placed her hands on her belly, waiting to feel it again. And then came another kick, stronger this time. "Hi, my love," she whispered, without realizing the words escaped her lips. It was in that instant that a knot formed in her throat. She shouldn't call him that. She shouldn't allow her heart to get involved. But how to avoid it? How to ignore that connection that grew stronger every day inside her? The following weeks brought more moments like that. In the silence of the early hours, she would talk softly to the baby, caressing her belly, telling him about the world outside, about the dreams she never realized, about the fear she felt. He would respond with small kicks, as if he understood her, as if he already knew that, even unwillingly, he was leaving a deep mark on his temporary mother. But then came the painful, cruel, inevitable thought. What if, at the decisive moment, I can't hand him over? This fear grew inside her like a shadow. She knew she should prepare herself for the day when her arms would be empty. But how to train the heart for something like that? She tried to convince herself that it was all just an agreement, that this baby was never hers. But deep down, She already knew the truth. Part of her would never be able to let him go, and that terrified her. One day, while returning from the market, an intense pain took over her belly. Cold sweat ran down her forehead, and her legs gave way. People around ran to help her, calling an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors were direct. She needed absolute rest. Any effort could put the baby's life at risk. When Ethan received the news from the doctor, he didn't hesitate. He ordered Carolina to go to his mansion immediately. He would not allow anything to happen to the heir he so desired. Upon arriving at the imposing residence, Carolina felt completely out of place. The grandeur of the place contrasted with the simplicity of her life. Everything there seemed too luxurious, too cold, too distant. But what most surprised her was seeing a side of Ethan she would never have imagined. He was always attentive to her well-being, ensuring she lacked nothing. The coldness that always marked his gaze now mixed with an unexpected care. Inside that immense house, Carolina and Ethan began to see each other daily. In the beginning, the conversations were brief and formal, limited to questions about the pregnancy and her well-being. But as time went on, small dialogues became deeper exchanges of experiences. One night, while Carolina was having tea on the balcony, Ethan appeared and, to her surprise, pulled up a chair next to her. "Can you sleep well?" he asked. Not looking at the horizon, Carolina sighed, warming her hands on the cup. "I'm still getting used to it. Everything here is different." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "I imagine. It can't be easy to be here out of obligation." She looked at him, trying to decipher this man, who until recently seemed inaccessible to her. "It's not just out of obligation. I chose to be here, and you chose to live this way. So alone." He looked away thoughtfully. Carolina noticed a different glint in his eyes, something between nostalgia and sadness. "Some choices aren't really choices," she replied. After a long silence, little by little, Carolina discovered that behind the cold and calculating facade existed a man marked by deep wounds. Ethan, in turn, began to realize that Carolina was not motivated by ambition, but by necessity and love for her family. She didn't desire his fortune. She just wanted to ensure a better future for her mother. The tension between the two grew, manifesting in prolonged glances and silences full of meaning. However, neither of them dared to admit what was happening. They were still prisoners of their own barriers. Days later, on a cold Sunday morning, Ethan was passing through the mansion hallway when he noticed that the door to Carolina's room was ajar. Not wanting to invade her privacy, he just cast a discreet glance inside and was surprised by the sight he found. Carolina was standing near the window, caressing her belly. The natural light that came in illuminated her face and her long hair, making her even more beautiful. The scene completely hypnotized him. She seemed immersed in thoughts, a small smile on her lips as she spoke softly to the baby. Ethan couldn't look away. There was something so genuine and serene in that moment that made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Suddenly, Carolina turned and met his gaze. Ethan became awkward, looking away for an instant. He cleared his throat, trying to find a justification. "I was just passing by and I saw you. I'm sorry." Carolina smiled softly. "It's okay," she said naturally. "I was just talking to the baby. He's restless today." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Restless? What do you mean?" She laughed, amused by his reaction. "Moving. Do you want to feel?" He hesitated for a moment, but then nodded positively. Carolina took his hand gently and placed it on her belly. An instant of silence hung between them until Ethan felt a subtle movement under his palm. His eyes widened, and for a brief second, an almost imperceptible smile appeared on his face. "He really moved," he murmured, visibly emotional. Carolina watched his expression with curiosity. Yes, he recognizes when someone is around. I think he liked you. Ethan slowly withdrew his hand, still assimilating what had just happened. Something inside him stirred, an unknown feeling, but one that seemed increasingly impossible to ignore. Without realizing it, in that instant, something between the two changed forever. What do you think of the unexpected bond between Ethan and Carolina? Do you think they should fight against their feelings, or should they let them grow naturally? Share your opinion in the comments. A new family. The days passed, and Ethan could no longer ignore what was happening inside him. His plan was simple: to secure an heir without emotional involvement. But reality had taken a completely different turn. He was in love. In Leah with Carolina, with the woman who was carrying his child. It was a frightening, but inevitable, realization. He tried to convince himself that it was just a passing impulse, something provoked by their coexistence, by the bond that was forming naturally due to the gestation. But it was a lie. Ethan knew he felt something much deeper. Every time Carolina smiled as she felt the baby move, he would catch himself admiring her in silence. Every gesture of hers, every little habit he discovered over time, only made him fall even deeper into this unexpected feeling. Even trying to keep himself cold and distant, he couldn't avoid the desire to be around, to protect her, to take care of her. On the other side, Carolina also suffered from the whirlwind of emotions that consumed her. Since that kiss in the park, Ethan hadn't left her thoughts. She tried to convince herself that it was a mistake, that she shouldn't allow herself to feel anything beyond what was agreed. But how to control the heart? She already knew that handing over the child would be the most difficult decision of her life. Now the pain multiplied, because in a few months it wouldn't just be the baby she would lose. She would lose Ethan too. The mysterious and reserved man who kissed her like no one before. The man who, even maintaining his coldness, was always around. Who silently took care of her in a way that maybe not even he realized. Carolina would close her eyes at night and try to convince herself that it was all temporary, that her life would soon return to normal. But how to return to normal when her heart no longer belonged to her? And Ethan, no matter how much he tried to fight against it, also knew the truth. Nothing was under his control anymore. Time seemed to have flown by. Carolina was already 9 months pregnant, feeling the weight of her belly and the growing anxiety. At any moment, her son would come into the world. She tried to prepare herself for the inevitable, for the moment she would need to hand him over. But deep down, she knew she would never be ready. On that Sunday morning, the sun was gently coming through the window, announcing a quiet day. Carolina got up with difficulty, feeling a slight discomfort. She walked slowly to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but before she could take a few more steps, a strong pressure took over her belly. A second later, she felt a warm liquid running down her legs. Her heart raced. "My God!" she murmured, startled. The pain came right after, intense and sharp. Her instinct screamed, and in a reflex, she held her belly while trying to lean on the counter. Panic took over her chest. "Ethan!" she cried with a choked voice. "Ethan!" On the floor above, Ethan was already on alert. Since he found out the birth was close, he had been in a state of vigil, ready to act at any sign that the time had come. When he heard Carolina's cry, his blood ran cold. Without hesitation, he ran down the stairs, his heart pounding hard in his chest. Upon seeing Carolina out of breath, holding her belly with tears in her eyes, reason disappeared. The rational and calculating man gave way to someone he never imagined being. "Carolina!" He approached in an instant. Holding her firmly. "Hold on, I'm here." "My water broke," she said between ragged breaths. Ethan didn't think twice. In a single movement, He picked Carolina up in his arms and carried her, ignoring any resistance from her. "Take us to the hospital, now!" he ordered the driver with a voice full of urgency. In the car, he held her hand tightly, something he had never done before. Seeing her there, vulnerable, surrendered to pain and fear, made something inside him break. "It's okay, Carolina," he whispered with a tone that tried to convey security. "I'm with you." Her eyes met his, and for a brief instant, everything around them disappeared. Time seemed an illusion inside the delivery room. Ethan watched everything with a mix of despair and enchantment. Carolina was straining, her hands gripping the sheets of the gurney, while her breathing mixed with groans of pain. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, the strong cry of a baby filled the room. Ethan felt something inside him collapse. "It's a boy!" the doctor announced. The emotion was overwhelming. Ethan, the man who never thought he would live something like this, found himself unable to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. His heir had come into the world. Carolina, exhausted, received the baby in her arms. His small, pink, defenseless face made her tremble. She caressed his soft skin, feeling the warmth of the child who for months had been a part of her. A single tear ran down her face. She knew what she needed to do. The agreement was there, waiting to be fulfilled. But how to rip from her chest something that was already a part of her? Ethan watched her in silence, the sparkle in Carolina's eyes, the way she held the baby, as if he were the most precious thing in the world. That hit him like a punch. Later, Ethan entered the hospital room. Carolina was sitting on the bed, cradling the baby against her chest. His heart ached. That scene, so simple and at the same time so powerful, made him realize something he had so far refused to accept. He didn't just want an heir. He wanted Carolina. He wanted that family. Taking a deep breath, he approached and stopped in front of her. "Carolina," he called hesitantly. She looked up at him, and Ethan saw her eyes were misty. "I know we had an agreement," he continued, his voice lower and full of emotion. "But that contract no longer makes sense to me, Carolina." She felt her heart race. What do you mean?" Ethan sat down next to her, sliding his fingers through the baby's fine hair. "I don't want this baby without you." He looked up, his gaze locking with hers. "Will you agree to stay with me? Forever?" A knot formed in Carolina's throat. She blinked, feeling the tears overflow. She never imagined that cold and impersonal agreement would turn into this. She never imagined that Ethan would be capable of love. But there he was, stripped of all his armor, offering her what she never thought she would have. With a trembling smile, she nodded. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper, but it was enough for Ethan to let out the breath he didn't even know he was holding. He held her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, sealing the new life they were about to build. The man who didn't believe in love had finally surrendered to it. And together they began a new story, a true family. What do you think of this ending? Do you believe Ethan's change of heart was genuine, or was it a reaction to the moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Join our community by subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications for more content like this. Thanks for watching.